Una presidencia en riesgo. Un plan para cambiar armas por rehenes y canalizar dinero a los rebeldes en Nicaragua. ¿Lo sabía el presidente? Y de no ser así, ¿por qué no lo sabía? Soy Mike Wallace y esto es Siglo. En el otoño de 1986, Ronald Reagan pasaba serenamente por su segundo periodo presidencial, uno de los más populares en la historia del país. 2 años antes, el héroe de la revolución conservadora había sido reelecto en una victoria de proporciones épicas. Pero todo eso se vino abajo en noviembre de 1986 por una serie de revelaciones que sacudieron fuertemente las bases de la administración Reagan.
A bombshell of a story at the White House today, 2 administration officials out. The revelation that the Iran arms deal helped funnel secret millions through Swiss banks to the Nicaraguan Contras. This may have been illegal. President Reagan says he was not informed, didn't know all that was going on.
Esa revelación era el último acontecimiento en una compleja trama de la Casa Blanca que había comenzado a descifrarse 3 semanas atrás. Se había revelado que la administración vendía armas en secreto a una nación enemiga, Irán, como esfuerzo para la liberación en el Líbano de unos rehenes estadounidenses. Esto era molesto para sus aliados políticos debido a la oposición que Reagan siempre había manifestado en relación al trato con terroristas. Reagan negó que la venta de armas a Irán estuviera ligada a la liberación de los rehenes.
In spite of the wildly speculative and false stories about arms for hostages and alleged ransom payments, we did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages, nor will we.
Insistió en no tener conocimiento alguno sobre el dinero utilizado para apoyar a los rebeldes de derecha en su lucha contra el gobierno de Nicaragua, pero muchos observadores en Washington sospechaban que el presidente no estaba diciendo la verdad.
I think if Ronald Reagan can be shown to have deliberately lied on 2 or 3 central points, then he faces a crisis of his presidency.
Era una crisis que hizo estremecer a la ciudad de Washington, que aún no se recuperaba del escándalo Watergate ocurrido 12 años atrás y que había llevado al entonces presidente Richard Nixon a la renuncia. Muchos se preguntaban si Ronald Reagan se dirigía hacia una caída similar.
My sense this morning was it's a new ball game, and the president senses he needs all the friends that he can get.
Las semillas de este escándalo habían sido sembradas en una crisis similar de rehenes, una crisis que ayudó a Ronald Reagan a llegar a la presidencia en el 80. En el 79, los seguidores del iraní Ayatollah Khomeini capturaron a 66 diplomáticos estadounidenses en la embajada de Estados Unidos en Teherán. El presidente Jimmy Carter luchó durante el resto de su periodo para resolver esa crisis. Por su parte, el candidato presidencial Ronald Reagan la convirtió en un importante tema de campaña.
I believe that this administration's foreign policy helped create the entire situation that made their kidnap possible. And I think the fact that they've been there that long is a humiliation and a disgrace to this country.
Como resultado, Carter asumió toda la presión de esa crisis, pero fue sacado del juego antes de recibir mérito alguno por la liberación de los rehenes.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
41 minutes after Ronald Reagan was sworn in as this country's 40th president, the American hostages in Iran began their flight to freedom.
In his toast, the new president made the announcement that his predecessor had so hoped to make.
Some 30 minutes ago, the planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran.
Sin embargo, los fundamentalistas del Medio Oriente habían aprendido con ese episodio que la toma de rehenes sí funcionaba. La táctica terrorista que contribuyó a sacar a Carter de la presidencia podía ser usada también contra su sucesor. Y durante los primeros años de la presidencia de Reagan, otros fueron capturados y retenidos como rehenes por fundamentalistas islámicos.
Some disturbing news from the Middle East. An American diplomat was kidnapped in Beirut this morning.
An American clergyman who has lived in Lebanon for 30 years was kidnapped by 3 men in Beirut today.
The latest victim to be snatched was Terry Anderson, the senior Middle East correspondent for the Associated Press in Beirut.
Y mientras la lista de rehenes crecía, el presidente Reagan dejaba en claro qué tan molesto estaba.
I'm as frustrated as anyone. I've pounded a few walls myself when I'm alone about this. It is frustrating.
Reagan could see these people, these Americans who were held captive in these barbaric conditions. And he wanted to free them. And really, that was all that mattered to him.
En 1985 la situación parecía empeorar. Había 7 rehenes estadounidenses retenidos, 6 de los cuales habían sido recientemente capturados por el Partido de Dios, en árabe Hezbollah, un grupo radical chiita. Los observadores de Occidente creían que los terroristas del Hezbollah recibían órdenes del mismo Ayatollah Khomeini. El presidente hablaba en contra de los terroristas en público.
We must not yield to the terrorist demands and invite more terrorism. We cannot reward their grisly deeds. We will not cave in. We make no concessions. We make no deals.
Sin embargo, tras las cámaras, la historia era otra.
Ronald Reagan tried over a dozen different initiatives to try to free American hostages. Ronald Reagan just couldn't conscience not doing everything in his power to get them freed.
Pero no se logró la liberación de los rehenes. En el verano de 1985, como respuesta a la creciente frustración del presidente, el consejero de Seguridad Nacional, Robert McFarlane, ideó un plan. Desde su punto de vista, esa nueva iniciativa no solo lograría la liberación de los rehenes, sino que también podía mejorar las relaciones futuras entre Irán y los Estados Unidos.
We became aware of the possibility of starting talks with people of authority and legitimate ability to represent Iran. And the president thought carefully about it, and after validating their bona fides, decided to go ahead.
La parte central del trato consistía en la venta de armas a Irán por medio de Israel. Los israelitas sugerían que dicho trato daría un mayor poder a los llamados moderados iraníes, quienes podían utilizar su influencia en el Líbano para ayudar en la liberación de los rehenes.
It was opposition to terrorism which inspired the entire policy.
Tanto el secretario de Estado George Shultz como el secretario de Defensa Caspar Weinberger se oponían a cualquier venta de armas, pero McFarlane convenció al presidente de que el trato conduciría a un importante adelanto diplomático, por lo que el presidente accedió a intentarlo.
What he allowed himself to think was that we were engaged in an effort to change Iran. And this big geopolitical event would incidentally get our hostages out. That was the way he rationalized it. That's the way his staff people and his CIA people explained it to him. And because he was so intent on the hostages, he bought into that very unlikely story.
Para mediados de agosto el plan estaba listo. Utilizando a Israel como intermediario, las armas fueron enviadas a Irán. La administración esperaba entonces que los rehenes fueran liberados. Sin embargo, luego de 2 cargamentos de más de 500 misiles antitanque Stow en agosto y septiembre del 85, solo un rehén volvió a casa.
One of 7 Americans kidnapped in Beirut, the Reverend Benjamin Weir, has been released. The 61-year-old Presbyterian missionary had been held captive for more than 16 months.
But Reverend Weir believes that his release may signal a last chance for freedom for the remaining Americans.
I believe a new window of opportunity has been opened, at least a crack. I fear that opportunity may not last long. I urge that new efforts be made and that new and creative options be explored.
President Reagan responded to criticism from the hostage families that he isn't doing enough.
Well, unfortunately, we can't tell even the family all the things that we are doing, so we just have to take that criticism, but it is not just.
En efecto, la administración Reagan estaba haciendo algo para traer a casa a esos rehenes. En noviembre aprobaron el envío de un tercer cargamento de armas a Irán, en esta oportunidad de misiles antiaéreos Hawk. Pero una vez que los Hawk llegaron, los iraníes alegaron que era el modelo equivocado y rompieron el trato. El resultado, 3 cargamentos de armas enviados y solo un rehén liberado. Se tuvo que convocar a una reunión.
Well, it was a meeting to review what had taken place since the president's approval of August, to the effect that we hadn't achieved our purposes and it was going or degenerating into an arms for hostage arrangement.
El grupo decidió enviar a McFarlane a Londres para una reunión cara a cara con Manouchehr Ghorbanifar, un traficante de armas iraní que actuaba como enlace de los llamados moderados para informarle que los Estados Unidos no enviaría más armas y que era hora de que todos los rehenes fueran liberados. Pero McFarlane no llegó muy lejos.
And when you met with Mr. Ghorbanifar, you found that his agenda was quite different, correct?
That's correct.
Certain number of toes for each hostage.
Yes.
And that revolted you.
That's correct.
And you left.
Yes.
And as far as you were concerned, you didn't want to have anything more to do with Ghorbanifar. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Incluso antes de su viaje a Londres, McFarlane había renunciado. Entre otras cosas, se había desilusionado profundamente por el poco progreso en el trato de armas. Incluso sugirió que era tiempo de terminarlo, pero se dice que Reagan temía que los iraníes se molestaran si no se enviaban los cargamentos, lo cual hubiera puesto a los rehenes en un peligro aún mayor. Además, debido a que los israelíes tenían cada vez más miedo de actuar como intermediarios, la administración decidió cambiar las tácticas.
In January of 1986, the president, on the advice of his advisors, decided that we would no longer deal through Israel, but deal directly.
Los tratos futuros con Irán serían llevados a cabo por ciudadanos privados que actuarían como agentes autorizados. El director de la CIA, Bill Casey, fue el encargado de este nuevo acuerdo.
It was Bill Casey's responsibility to figure out how to carry it out, and he chose to use an independent agent who was retired Major General Secord. Secord, through the Central Intelligence Agency, was buying the arms from the Defense Department.
Y a través del general de brigada Richard Secord, 2 cargamentos con un total de 1,000 misiles Tau fueron enviados a Irán en febrero. Aún así, ningún rehén fue liberado. En un último esfuerzo, McFarlane volvió de su retiro para acompañar al teniente coronel Oliver North a Teherán. Su avión transportaba repuestos de misiles y el trato convenía que se enviarían más partes apenas se liberara a los rehenes. Sin embargo, el funcionario iraní con el cual se reunieron en Teherán no tenía conocimiento alguno del plan y estaba interesado únicamente en las armas, no en la liberación de rehenes o en conversaciones de paz. Una vez más, Estados Unidos había sido traicionado.
They just didn't know what they were doing, and the results speak for themselves.
Well, was it naivete? Was it stupidity? What?
Total unfamiliarity with the métier itself. Plus the fact that you're dealing with Persians who for thousands of years have made their living by bazaar trading and who know how to ping-pong people like North, McFarlane, Poindexter, until the cows come home, or I should say, until the camels come home.
El hombre que primero reconoció que estaban atrapados en un juego de ping-pong era Robert McFarlane, que había ideado la iniciativa en primer lugar. Pero Oliver North, el ex asistente de McFarlane, era aún leal a la operación. Eso debido a que North perseguía ahora una agenda paralela que ligaba la venta de armas a Irán con una lucha guerrillera más cercana en las selvas de Nicaragua. Esta parte de la historia al regreso en siglo XX. Aun cuando el trato de armas con Irán no alcanzó su objetivo primordial, la liberación de rehenes en el Líbano, la operación secreta generó una ganancia inesperada. Y fue cuando Oliver North pensó en lo que luego llamaría una excelente idea.
It was brought to me by Oliver North that we could use the surplus money that Secord had from the Iranian arms sales to buy weapons and provide support to the Contras.
Los Contras eran rebeldes de derecha que luchaban contra el gobierno sandinista de izquierda en Nicaragua, y el brindarles o no apoyo se había convertido en un tema espinoso que dividía al Congreso y a los ciudadanos estadounidenses. Los sandinistas habían estado en el poder desde el año 79 y su líder, Daniel Ortega, había establecido estrechas relaciones con los regímenes comunistas de la Unión Soviética y Cuba. Eso era suficiente motivo para convencer a Reagan de que los sandinistas constituían una seria amenaza.
President Reagan himself today warned of what he called a sanctuary for terrorists and subversives, just 2 days driving time from Harlingen, Texas. That's a quote.
If we don't want to see the map of Central America covered in a sea of red, eventually lapping at our own borders. We must act now.
Lo que Reagan tenía en mente era ofrecer un sólido apoyo a los enemigos de Ortega, los
Defeat for the
Contras.
Contras would mean a second Cuba on the mainland of North America.
Pero mientras Reagan y otros republicanos advertían sobre la posibilidad de otra Cuba, los demócratas y algunos republicanos advertían
This could
sobre
be a
otra
rerun of
Vietnam.
Vietnam. First American money, then American advisors, then American control of the war, then American troops.
Here we are, once again, old men creating a monster for young men, young Americans to destroy.
Lo que no ayudaba al gobierno era el descubrimiento de que la CIA había minado los puertos nicaragüenses. El presidente de Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, llamó a esa operación secreta una guerra no declarada. Algunos congresistas, molestos por no haber sido informados, culparon al director de la CIA, William Casey, quien tenía fama de ser poco sincero.
He's the type of person, unless you ask the right question, you don't get an answer. A Republican member of the Senate described him as a person who, if your coat was on fire, he wouldn't tell you unless you asked him.
Casey pidió disculpas. Sin embargo, en 1984 el Congreso aprobó la enmienda Boland, la cual prohibía a la CIA y a otras agencias de inteligencia involucrarse con Nicaragua. Pero sin importar lo que dijera el Congreso, el director de la CIA no estaba dispuesto a renunciar.
William Casey was asked the question, what do you think Congress's role is when it comes to intelligence? Should it engage in accountability? And he said in a rather gruff, rather grumbly way, because he always spoke as though he had a lot of grits in his mouth, he said, the business of Congress is to stay out of my business.
Ahora, bajo un mayor escrutinio por parte del Congreso, Casey buscaba ayuda para su lucha en lugares menos vigilados, como el Consejo Nacional de Seguridad, el cual, al menos técnicamente, no era considerado como una agencia de inteligencia. El contacto de Casey era Oliver North.
Ollie was one of the best staff officers I've ever had the opportunity to work with in terms of giving him a task, and he carried it out.
Para apoyar la lucha de los contras nicaragüenses, North debía recolectar fondos de ciudadanos y organizaciones privadas en los Estados Unidos, como también de aliados en el exterior, y para el envío de cargamentos de armas y dinero utilizaría la ayuda de amigos como el general de brigada Richard Secker, quien llevaba a cabo el trato secreto de armas con Irán, y el general del ejército John Single.
Let me put a thesis to you, General Single. Private citizen Jack Single has become Ronald Reagan's secret weapon to sidestep a Congress that will not permit him to act in the arenas where he believes that our security interests are at stake. True? True. You're sidestepping the Congress. You're, in effect, almost subverting the will of the Congress up to now.
Well, that's true, but the foreign policy by our Constitution is to be made by the President, not by the Congress.
The minimum that Jack Singlab has been doing is, as an American citizen, personally been encouraging and assisting the waging of a war against the people with whom we are at peace.
He acknowledges that.
That's in violation of the law. That's in violation of the Neutrality Act.
En octubre de 1986 se obtuvo nueva evidencia que probaba que el gobierno de Reagan estaba enviando en secreto armas a los Contras.
A plane crash in the jungle is raising new questions tonight about U.S. involvement in the war in Nicaragua. The Sandinista government says its troops shot down a plane carrying weapons for the Contra rebels and captured a man they describe as a U.S. military advisor.
My name is Gene Hausenfuss. And where you're from? Marinette, Wisconsin.
On the plane, the Nicaraguan government says, were 55 light machine guns, 50,000 rounds of ammunition, and assorted other military hardware. Nicaragua claims 3 others died in the crash, 2 of them Americans.
La Casa Blanca negó estar involucrada.
The people involved were not from our military, not from any U.S. government agency, and CIA included.
Pero el testimonio del prisionero indicaba lo contrario.
You weren't a freedom fighter that President Reagan talks about?
No, I'm not a freedom fighter. I'm not one of these soldiers of fortune or anything. I was another individual who was asked if they wanted to work for a job that you did before, and there was a chance to make money at it, and we did.
Do you feel that the United States has an obligation to come to your rescue?
No. I would like to say yes, but as an individual going out on my own, I would probably say no, but then being tied in with the company the way I was and them knowing what I was doing.
The company being CIA?
Yes. Then I believe I deserve a little bit of backing.
Eugene Hazen tenía razones para esperar apoyo. En su avión se encontraron registros telefónicos y tarjetas de presentación que revelaban conexiones con los despachos de Oliver North, el general Secord e incluso el vicepresidente Bush.
What's an American sitting at home to make of all this?
He's going to make that our government is backing this 100%. And that's what I believe too.
Quizás era así, pero no podía haber sido un peor momento para el gobierno de Reagan, pues justo cuando se revelaba esta operación secreta en Centroamérica, otra iniciativa se descubría en el Medio Oriente. Irónicamente, ese descubrimiento comenzó con la noticia de la liberación de un rehén.
David Jacobson was taken through the war-ravaged streets of Beirut, across the Green Line to the Christian sector in the east, free after 17 months in captivity.
Pero apenas un día después de la liberación de David Jacobson, el diario libanés Al-Shira publicó un reportaje acerca de un trato de armas secreto en Irán.
In a bizarre tale worthy of a thriller, Iran's news agency reports that Robert McFarlane, President Reagan's former national security advisor, recently made a secret visit to Tehran. Iran says McFarlane came carrying a Bible signed by President Reagan, seeking help in freeing hostages held by pro-Iranian groups in Lebanon. In response, the Iranians say they demanded spare parts for their U.S.-made weapons and an end to political and military support for Iraq in its war with Iran.
Esa desgarradora historia, ese primer escándalo estremeció a Washington y colocó a la presidencia de Reagan a la defensiva. Pero lo peor estaba aún por venir, el impacto total del escándalo y los desesperados intentos por controlar el daño al regreso en siglo XX. La del trato con Irán del cambio de armas por rehenes fue negativa para Reagan, pero la revelación del uso del dinero obtenido del trato para apoyar a los Contras en Nicaragua era más perturbador porque podía ser ilegal y haber sido aprobado por el mismo presidente, lo que la convertiría en una ofensa punible. Es por ello que el presidente se distanció rápidamente del escándalo.
Although not directly involved, Vice Admiral John Poindexter has asked to be relieved of his assignment as Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs and to return to another assignment in the Navy. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North has been relieved of his duties on the National Security Council staff.
Suddenly on the 25th of November 1986, everybody in the world knows who Ollie North is. It's a rather remarkable thing to find yourself fired on national television.
Is anyone else going to be let go, sir? Is anyone else going to be let go?
No one was let go, they chose to go.
What about Secretary? Senator, who in the NSC was aware that this extra amount of money was being transferred to the so-called Contras or under their control? Did Admiral Poindexter specifically know? Who else knew? And did the CIA know? Was CIA Director Casey aware of this?
The only persons in the United States government that knew precisely about this, the only person was Lieutenant Colonel North.
John Poindexter knew that, and I knew that there would have to be people who were going to go, made to walk the plank, politically.
Incluso mientras North era juzgado política y públicamente, todos se preguntaban cómo podía el presidente ignorar lo que hacía su propio personal.
There's something wrong when the president does not know what's going on in the basement of the White House.
How is it that so much of this can go on and the president not know it? He is the president of the United States. Why doesn't he know?
Because somebody didn't tell him, that's why.
Ignorar una operación de esa magnitud habría sido imposible en cualquier otro periodo presidencial.
He did not know about this transfer of funds from the Iranian sale to Nicaragua. Good God, Lyndon Johnson could have told you about the amount of money that was being appropriated to pay the washwoman on the 5th floor of the Pentagon.
Pero Reagan siempre había dado a su personal la libertad suficiente para manejar las operaciones mientras que él se concentraba en los temas más amplios, la visión como se le llamó luego.
We know that the president is not a detailed man. He's a genius at his ability to put broad ideas over, but he does not look at details. The problem with intelligence business is that the details can kill you frequently in intelligence operations.
El problema era que algunos detalles podían ser ilegales.
Besides the policy itself, Congress will now focus on whether laws were broken, specifically the Bolin Amendment, barring funds for direct or indirect military operations in Nicaragua, and the arms export law, requiring congressional approval of major arms sales or transfers.
We all knew that it was going to be a political firestorm. None of us, I don't believe, ever expected that someone would be accused of breaking the law.
Pero North no estaba dispuesto a arriesgarse y comenzó a destruir cantidad de documentos.
Ousted National Security Council operative Oliver North would not respond to allegations that he shredded documents last weekend.
I have no statement to make at this time. At the appropriate time and in the appropriate forum, I will make a full exposition, and I will do so on the advice of my attorney.
La destrucción de los documentos incrementó la sospecha de que North estaba encubriendo algo o a alguien. Inicialmente la Casa Blanca negó saber algo sobre los cargamentos de armas a Irán.
There was at least one transaction that we know about in which Israel shipped weapons without any authorization from the United States.
The Israelis did it on their own?
That's my understanding, yes.
Miss agregó que era Israel y no los Estados Unidos quien había manejado la desviación de los fondos a los Contras. Israel lo negó, declarando que solo había enviado armas para ayudar a un aliado y que no tenía conocimiento de los fondos.
The payment for this equipment was made directly by an Iranian representative to a Swiss bank in accordance with instructions from the American representative.
Bajo presión, el Ministerio de Justicia solicitó una investigación independiente sobre las posibles violaciones penales con el fiscal especial Lawrence Walsh al mando. El mismo Reagan designó al senador John Tower para dirigir una comisión de la Casa Blanca para investigar el papel que había desempeñado el Consejo Nacional de Seguridad en las operaciones secretas. El Congreso inició sus propias investigaciones.
Word tonight that both the House and Senate will have special committees to investigate the arms for the Ayatollah, cash for the Contras, wheeling and dealing.
Pero antes del inicio de las audiencias del Comité Especial, tanto la Casa Blanca como el Senado llevaron a cabo investigaciones preliminares a puerta cerrada. Uno de los primeros en ser llamados fue el director de la CIA, William Casey, quien tenía fama de practicar tácticas obstruccionistas y así lo demostró.
Did the CIA do anything wrong?
No, of course not. That's a hell of a question to ask me.
No hubo más interrogatorios debido a la noticia de que Casey sufría un tumor cerebral maligno.
73-year-old William Casey, who was under political siege on Capitol Hill and was scheduled to be grilled in another appearance tomorrow about what he and the CIA knew about the Iran arms Nicaraguan Contra connection, is in Georgetown University Hospital tonight after suffering 2 seizures today, the first at his CIA office and the second at the hospital.
Robert McFarlane, quien había estado encargado de la venta de armas a Irán, estaba igualmente bajo asedio y con problemas de salud, abatido por el papel crucial que había desempeñado en el escándalo, tal como lo recuerda cuando lo entrevisté en el año 94.
You were simply convinced that you were convinced there was nothing good in you and nothing good in your future.
Yes, I had been the reason why we had this huge national scandal and in the process would lose the chance to do so many useful things, and I could have allowed us to prevent that.
Su depresión era tan severa que en el mes de febrero del 87 intentó suicidarse.
Robert McFarlane, President Reagan's former national security advisor, remains in the hospital this morning under close watch. McFarlane has survived what appears to be an attempt to take his own life.
Mientras McFarlane se recuperaba, la Comisión Tower, escogida por el presidente Reagan, publicó un severo informe donde tildaba al presidente de no estar al tanto. El informe afirmaba que con la política de venta de armas a Irán se intentaba pagar un rescate por los rehenes. Reagan finalmente admitió que su iniciativa había fallado.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not. There are reasons why it happened.
but no excuses.
Sin lugar a dudas, según la Comisión Tower, no había excusas. El informe afirmaba que aun cuando el presidente no lo recordaba, probablemente sí había autorizado el primer cargamento israelí de armas a Irán, aquel que originalmente declaró Israel que había hecho por su propia cuenta. Reagan se vio obligado a recapacitar.
I did approve it. I just can't say specifically when. But rest assured, there's plenty of record-keeping now going on at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
2 meses después de que el presidente prometiera realizar cambios en la Casa Blanca, el Congreso inició las audiencias públicas desde el escándalo Watergate por faltas de funcionarios de alto nivel de la Casa Blanca.
There is tension at the White House about what the hearings may reveal, but Ronald Reagan does not appear to share it. The president said he's already told all he knows, and his attitude as the hearings begin?
I'm hopeful that I'm finally going to hear some of the things that I'm still waiting to learn about.
No tuvo que esperar mucho. Luego del inicio de las audiencias, el antiguo consejero de Seguridad Nacional Robert McFarlane subió al estrado solo unos meses después de intentar suicidarse. Inmediatamente contradijo algunas de las declaraciones oficiales del presidente, incluyendo el hecho de ignorar acerca de la recaudación de dinero para los Contras.
According to McFarlane, both the president and vice president were well aware of contributions from foreign countries, including $32 million in donations from Saudi Arabia.
I recall getting his reaction as being one of analogous to the earlier time of gratitude and satisfaction, not of surprise.
Por el testimonio de McFarlane, el presidente cambió su versión.
On Tuesday, the president denied any involvement in the solicitation of Saudi funds for the Contras in this meeting with King Fahd in 1985. But Wednesday, he conceded after a check of his personal diaries that the subject had in fact been discussed.
My diary shows that I never brought it up, and it shows that the king, before he left, told me that he was doing that and that he was going to increase the aid.
Al día siguiente se cuestionó otra de las declaraciones de Reagan.
He still says he knew nothing of wrongdoing by aides, but testimony has suggested he knew a lot about efforts to aid the Contras. And today, Mr. Reagan seemed willing to shoulder the responsibility.
As a matter of fact, I was very definitely involved in the decisions about support to the freedom fighters. My idea to begin with.
Mientras las audiencias proseguían, McFarlane implicó a otro funcionario de alto rango del gobierno.
During the hardest questioning he has yet faced, Robert McFarlane made a startling new disclosure. Oliver North, who was supposed to have been McFarlane's deputy on the National Security Council, may in fact have been taking orders from William Casey of the CIA.
Did you come to believe that perhaps Mr. Casey was giving him instructions in how to conduct this particular operation with respect to either Nicaragua or Iran?
Senator Cohen, I think so.
It's rather clear that Oliver North was acting under at least the aegis of Director Casey during this time.
Yes, sir.
Pero William Casey había muerto por complicaciones luego de una cirugía, solo un día antes del inicio de las audiencias. Su versión de los hechos se había ido con él a la tumba.
Investigators say the Casey-North connection now being revealed helps explain why North has said his actions were approved by higher-ups. And it raises a larger question. Wouldn't Casey, knowing so much, tell his good friend the president at least something about the secret war being run from the White House?
Si Casey se lo había comunicado al presidente, no existía confirmación alguna por parte de la Casa Blanca. Mientras las audiencias progresaban, Oliver North se convirtió en el blanco principal y era la figura clave en la controversia.
Was he a person who ran with the ball?
Yes, he was.
Did you discuss this with the Secretary of State?
No, sir. Only with Colonel North.
The note that I have in my notebook says, "Monitor Ollie."
He said on several occasions that he would always be the fall guy if this story ever broke.
Pero si North surgía como el hombre en el centro del escándalo, la pregunta era si implicaría a sus superiores, incluyendo a su comandante en jefe. Esa era la pregunta que se hacían millones de estadounidenses mientras el coronel North rendía testimonio en el Congreso. Su versión del escándalo Irán Contras al regreso en sí. Cuando Oliver North finalmente compareció ante el Congreso a principios de julio de 1987, los riesgos eran altos. Se asumía que el propio North estaba inmerso en problemas legales. La pregunta era si trataría de implicar a sus superiores en la administración Reagan, incluyendo al presidente. La destitución era algo factible. Pero desde el inicio este combativo soldado no dio cuartel.
I came here to tell you the truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm here to tell it all.
Oliver North, under oath, under fire, and firing back from the witness stand after months of delaying and stonewalling. The crucial question, was President Reagan involved in or aware of lawbreaking?
I never personally discussed the use of the residuals or profits from the sale of U.S. weapons to Iran for the purpose of supporting the Nicaraguan resistance with the president. I assumed that the president was aware of what I was doing and had, through my superiors, approved it. I sought approval of my superiors for every one of my actions.
Es por ello que a North le molestaba la idea de actuar en solitario.
I realize there's a lot of folks around that think there's a loose cannon on the gun deck estate at the NSC. That wasn't what I heard while I worked there. I've only heard it since I left. People used to walk up to me and tell me what a great job I was doing. You walk into that hearing room, and there on the raised dais up there are all the Roman emperors. And there in the pit below them are all the TV cameras and those motor-driven cameras where you push the button and it shoots 60 frames every time you pick your nose. They were all there. And behind us, over 100 reporters on those tables back behind us, and way in the back of the room, 8 or 9 seats for the American people in whose name all this is being done.
Con su uniforme de la Marina y con medallas prendidas al pecho, North declaró ante el Congreso que él solo había actuado como un buen soldado que cumplía órdenes.
I don't believe that anything I did while I was at the NSC was a violation of law, nor do I believe that anything we did while I was at the NSC was a violation of law. I didn't believe it then. I don't believe it now. If I believed it then, I wouldn't.
North declaró que sus actividades secretas en Nicaragua tenían el apoyo del director de la CIA, William Casey. Según North, Bill Casey estaba involucrado en ese trato desde el principio.
Director Casey had specific and detailed knowledge because I briefed him frequently in detail.
North testified that Casey was the one who authorized the diversion of funds to the Contras at the very start.
Director Casey used several words to describe how he felt about it, all of which were effusive. He referred to it as the ultimate irony, the ultimate covert operation kind of thing.
Committee investigators have long suspected that Casey was the mastermind of the entire affair, turning the National Security Council into a mini CIA under his personal direction. North seemed to corroborate that today.
He told me specifically, get rid of things, get rid of that book, because that book has in it the names of everybody, the addresses of everybody. Just get rid of it and clean things up. And I did so.
North también dijo tener la impresión de que Casey y los demás contaban con él para asumir toda la culpa en caso de que sus operaciones secretas fueran descubiertas.
I do honestly believe that they expected that Ollie would go quietly, and Ollie intended to do so right up until the day that somebody decided to start a criminal prosecution.
North no solo se negó a asumir la culpa, sino que también defendió sus acciones.
I don't think it was wrong. I think it was a neat idea.
Responsabilizó al Congreso del desastre en Nicaragua.
Plain and simple, the Congress is to blame because of the fickle, vacillating, unpredictable, on-again, off-again policy toward the Nicaraguan democratic resistance, the so-called Contras. I was adamant that I was not going to just sit there and take it from a bunch of people who had opposed this president's efforts to keep America out of a war in Central America, who had opposed this president's efforts to bring the evil empire down, who had opposed what we had tried to do in terms of protecting the vital interests of this country.
Algunos congresistas estaban indignados por el argumento de North que afirmaba que eran de alguna manera poco patriotas.
It is possible for an American to disagree with you on aid to the Contras and still love God and still love this country just as much as you do.
Pero la desafiante declaración de North fue ventajosa para él, especialmente frente a la opinión pública. El presidente Reagan anunció por medio de un vocero que no estaba observando las audiencias, pero otros millones de ciudadanos sí, y para el momento en que North regresó al estrado en el segundo día de testimonio, se había convertido en una celebridad.
The lines start forming at dawn to get in the hearing. Many of them coming just for a glimpse of the Marine who arrives in a presidential-style motorcade. The cops already call it the Ollie-cade. Let's face it, love him or hate him, the man's become an instant celebrity.
I'm pulling for Ollie. He's precious in that uniform.
I think it's a witch hunt. I think that Ollie North is a real hero.
It's not quite Ollie mania yet, but there's already street theater. The T-shirt business is thriving. Ronald Reagan says he's not watching, but everyone else in the Capitol seems to be.
North walked in his Marine Corps uniform and looked at those 8 senators and 11 congressmen and 180 staff members, all of whom were talking about how Oliver North was going to be toast when they finished with him, and 5 days later he left them for dead.
He managed to convince the committee, and he managed to convince a great number of Americans that he was simply part of a chain of command, and he was down the chain of command, so that naturally the orders were given higher.
Pero incluso después de la declaración de North, permanecía la interrogante. ¿Tenía el presidente conocimiento sobre el apoyo a los Contras? Respondió el antiguo director del Consejo de Seguridad, John Poindexter.
The buck stops here with me.
Poindexter said he deliberately did not tell President Reagan about the diversion of Iran arms money to the Contras.
I made the decision, but I did not want him to be associated with the decision.
The president watched the hearings this time, and White House reaction focused hard on the good news, that Poindexter said Mr. Reagan didn't know specifics about the money diversion.
I made the decision. I felt that I had the authority to do it.
Within minutes after that admission, the first puff of smoke came from Poindexter's pipe, and you could almost hear the first sighs of relief from many members of the committee.
Esto significaba que no se podía siquiera considerar implicar al presidente Reagan o proceder legalmente en su contra.
As the president and his staff see it, the only real issue hanging over Mr. Reagan's head was whether he knew about the diversion of funds to the Contras. So with today's testimony from Admiral Poindexter, the White House would like to believe that the question has been settled.
Las audiencias finalizaron a principios de agosto de 1987, luego de 40 días y 250 horas de testimonios. Algunos días más tarde, Reagan se disculpó públicamente por una política errada.
The buck does not stop with Admiral Poindexter, as he stated in his testimony. It stops with me. I am the one who is ultimately accountable to the American people.
Pero Reagan sobrevivió al escándalo Irán Contras y culminó su periodo arriba en las encuestas.
Reagan was such a unique figure, really, in the history of this country, who enjoyed such an enormous reservoir of goodwill. The country clearly didn't have the stomach for another round of impeachment hearings, and he was so popular, he was able to draw upon that goodwill to largely stay out of harm's way.
Pero el escándalo Irán Contras tuvo sus consecuencias, algunas de ellas más irónicas que penales. Algunas reflexiones finales al regreso en sí. El escándalo Irán Contras culminó con consecuencias más leves que graves. Gracias a una combinación de inmunidades parlamentarias e indultos, ningún funcionario de alto rango fue a prisión por su participación. Y con el paso del tiempo, las metas que se buscaban se lograron, aunque sin la ayuda de Washington. En Nicaragua, los sandinistas salieron del poder en el año 90 con elecciones libres, mientras todos los rehenes estadounidenses en el Líbano fueron liberados a finales del 91, con escasa evidencia de que el trato de armas 6 años atrás hubiese ayudado de alguna manera a asegurar su liberación. De hecho, el mayor beneficiario de toda la operación fue el hombre que la dirigió, Oliver North. Era un desconocido coronel de la Marina cuando todo comenzó, escribió una exitosa autobiografía y se convirtió en animador de un programa de radio. Y en el año 94 estuvo muy cerca de ser senador por el estado de Virginia. En resumen, su carrera es un recordatorio de que los escándalos de Washington pueden, a veces, generar los más inesperados héroes. Soy Mike Wallace y esto es siglo XX.